Hey there, folks. I'm Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox, and welcome to episode number 20 of the Weekly Ratchet. We're going to talk about some board games, and I'm going to talk about me because you asked me to. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Weekly Ratchet. Thank you so much for stopping by. It is Sunday, June 16th. It is Father's Day here in the U.S., a very well-rounded Hallmark holiday. But my family is putting together a strawberry dessert for dinner, which I'm very excited for. We just had a fantastic fried chicken dinner using a bunch of different types of potato chips ground up as breading for some chicken tenders. It was amazing. More on that maybe later. But we're going to go ahead and get through this episode because Daddy's itching for dessert, all right? So, as I mentioned, it's Sunday, and I did kind of tease last week that it's going to be a very busy week for me, unfortunately, outside of the board gaming sphere. So Monday will be sort of a routine day. Actually, I'm going over to the cabin to finish up filming the Dice Tower Top 100. I wanted to do the last 20 games there at the cabin. Tuesday morning, I leave to go look at some wind turbines. I'll have some pictures, hopefully, to share of those later. And then Wednesday, I leave for Georgia for a family reunion, and I won't be back until Sunday. Now, I'm not going to get to probably play a lot of games this week. However, we're going to bring a handful of those Chris Handy little Paco games. My wife and I have already kind of chatted about it. Figured that would be a good chance for us to knock out some of those real small footprint games when we are playing in a, someone else's house on a relatively small kitchen table, all that kind of good stuff. So that's going to be the plan, and we'll see how it works. For now, let's go ahead and get to newly acquired games. New games. This will be a very quick segment because the only thing that has come in lately is Honey Buzz Fall Flavors. This is an expansion, a very big box expansion for the Honey Buzz board game. And in fact, I just got done talking about Honey Buzz in my top 100. It is a worker placement order fulfillment game with also a tableau building element where you're sort of setting up these honeycomb tiles to then trigger various actions in addition to the worker placement aspect of the game. The worker placement sort of uses this beeline idea in that you have to always place one more worker than the last number of workers played by the previous player to take that action. So if a player has 2 bees on a space, you then have to play 3 to be able to take that same action. And you're doing all this to generate honey that you're then using to fulfill various orders or just sell off for some money to sort of keep your engine of sorts going. It's a neat game. This one is way late. Folks have been waiting a long time for this. In fact, I remember that I late pledged this sitting at an Italian restaurant with my parents visiting them in North Carolina. I got an email about it and I thought, oh yeah, I really do want to back this. And that was over 2 years ago because I wasn't even living in this house. And we finally got this just the other day. And I know that the designer has had a rough patch. He's, just the usual, getting a lot of flack from the community, a lot of people just being very, rude and aggressive. But here it is. The game made it. And to those folks, I hope theirs takes longer to show up. But anyways, it is here. Looking forward to trying this one out. I haven't played the original game in a good while. It's been a little while since I played it, but it was a game I really enjoyed, and so I'm looking forward to trying this one out. That is it for newly acquired games because I'm not going to count Aquatica, which did show up from, I forgot the name of that publisher, but I had requested a copy of the newest expansion, and instead they sent me the base game, which I already have. So hopefully I'll get that remedied and have something to talk about here shortly. I do have some other interesting stuff coming in the next few days, maybe the next week or so, and I'm looking forward to sharing those with you as well. But that's it. So let's get to question of the week. Okay, so question of the week, and I'll tell you, I just finished filming this entire segment and the rest of this entire episode before realizing that the camera wasn't actually recording. So I've got to do all this all over again. I'll tell you, I've been in front of this camera for about maybe 6 hours today, or this is at least into my 6th hour. I'm a little tired. Hopefully I can get through this. Anyways, here we go with question of the week. Last week I asked you to ask me anything. And of course, I got a great variety of questions. I was a little anxious going into this, but everyone kept everything well above board, and I'm looking forward to these conversational topics. Up first was CR Poll, who asked how many games have I fixed with 3D printers, and asked if I play games while the 3D printer is working or if I let it work overnight, and do I have any published 3D files. I think that the topic of fixing a game is somewhat nebulous. What I may think fixes a game, you may have no interest in, and of course vice versa. When I think of games, I think of 3D printing inserts. I think of ways that makes the game faster to set up and easier to play, and for me that is certainly all about inserts. And I think I mentioned these in a previous episode. I talked about an insert for Brewcrafters, a game which has a ton of components, and I was able to really streamline the setup of that game. I also mentioned an insert for Zaya, which same thing, takes tons of little stacks of components, especially when you have stacks of little tiny tokens. There are these tiny little, I think they're called relic tokens. They're about maybe this long and this wide, and there's maybe 12.5 in the game, but there's no way to keep a stack of those nice and neat. They're very easily going to get knocked over. They're very hard to just sort of keep in a very small space. Either you just kind of lay them out into a pile, which then means they take up way more space than they need to, or again, you got to try and stack them up and keep them stacked up every time you use them. So that's how I like to fix my games, is make them a lot easier to get set up, get to the table, and so on and so forth. I also have a list. In fact, I always have to check the name of this game. It's called Lost Valley. It's an older game, and same thing. It's got a ton of different components, and not only that, but you have to set up a market when you play this game, and the number of tiles in the market fluctuates based on the player count, which makes sense. But it means that, again, you've got to have all these components stored in bags. You have to get out as many as you need for each player count, and it just takes forever to open all these bags, count out the components, and so on and so forth. So I made an organizer that you put all these components in, and it's actually separated into rows. So if you're playing with 2 players, you just use the front row. If you're playing at 3 players, you use the first 2 rows, which will add the extra component or components that you need for that player count, so on and so forth. And it just, again, you pick this thing out of the box, pop the lid off of it, and you're basically ready to play. And that's what I think of when I think of fixing games. I haven't really done a whole lot of components for games, especially just kind of like beautification things. I did make a beer stein mug kind of a thing for the game of Taverns of Tiefenthal. It just comes with this little cardboard standee, and I made this much larger scale, beer mug. And in fact, I didn't even make it. I just found it online and 3D printed it. I also did make new standees for Gloomhaven, a game that I have not played very much, but I never liked the way that you had to reference the health of an enemy on the board. You had to kind of check the side card. You had to count the number of tokens there and subtract it from the starting health of the it was such a pain in the butt. And so I made these extra standees. Again, I found a file online, but I heavily modified them to work better, I felt, for the game. I made them smaller, first of all, so they would fit better within the hexes of the boards. And then I also added this little shelf into the standee, which would hold these modifier tokens that you use throughout the game. Very small little tokens that may indicate that a character was disarmed or immobile or bleeding or whatever. And you could just kind of easily set these on the standee. So you could just look at that enemy, know how much health they had, anywhere from 0 to 99, know any attributes that was affecting that character, and you were good to go. All that other information was no longer necessary. All these other sideboards and such, you could just almost get rid of. And so, again, does it fix it? I don't know, maybe. But that is certainly one of the things that I aim for, is improving the replayability or playability of games. One of my other favorite projects was completely rebuilding the game of Number 9. I don't remember if I mentioned that here on the channel or not, but the original base game of Number 9, a very simple, abstract sort of tile stacking game. And I took my copy from 4 players all the way up to 10 players in the same box with building my own organizer and everything. I love my custom copy of that game. But that took a long time to print. So the next answer to your next question was, a lot of my prints can take hours and hours and hours. I've even had some that lasted more than 24 hours. And so, yeah, it's running. I may not even be in the house. I usually try to let it run when no one is here because they can be a fire hazard. But I've left it running while I go to work. I left it running overnight. We've got, smoke detectors in the room, all that kind of good stuff. And there are protections built into these things to keep them from overheating, but you just never know what might happen. Anyways, they run for a long time, and I don't know what you would consider a published 3D file. There is the website Thingiverse, which I do feel like is kind of being phased out because it has become so laden with ads that I don't feel like a lot of folks like using it anymore. But I had a couple of files out there, including a lot of the ones that I've mentioned here, and I actually had someone give me $5 voluntarily. They donated $5 to me for my Brewcrafters insert, which they called a complete masterpiece. Not my words, their words. I thought it was kind of funny. Gave me $5 for my hard work. I thought that was amusing. And thanks for that question, CR Poll. Up next, Wonderflonium and Rentless both asked, what was my favorite component in any board game? And this one was a little tricky. I wasn't quite sure how to answer this. I wasn't sure if you kind of meant, generally speaking, do I like cards? Do I like dice or wooden components? And if I had to give an answer there, it'd probably be screen-printed meeples. I love the meeples in, what's the name of that game? Life of the Amazonia. Also, On Mars has some fantastic screen-printed meeples. But I'm going with more of a specific standpoint, specific components of a specific game, and I kind of have a quick top three. Number 3 is the metal coins in the game of Zaya. They're a really unique shape. They kind of look like the inner piston of a rotary engine, and of course they're metal, and I just enjoyed the way that they look and feel. I really like the beer 6-pack cardboard tokens that comes in the game of Brewcrafters. Again, with my insert, keeps these things organized because there are a ton of them. But I just love the whole art and how they made, the 6-pack holder, and you can see a little art on the bottles itself. And I just love having, beer 6-packs in a board game. But I do think that my number one component, and again, I'm probably forgetting a ton of other games with a ton of really, really good components. But one of the ones that really always stood out to me was the plastic coffee beans in the game of Coffee Traders. These are just used to mark when you have fulfilled an order in the game, and you could have just as easily had, again, a little, screen printed piece of wood, or even just a disc, or a cube to just mark that you filled that order. But instead, they are these somewhat sculpted, actually textured plastic coffee beans, and they just look fantastic. And how many games do you have with coffee beans in them? So that definitely is at least at the top of my list. Omar Hernandez asked, am I going to the Dice Tower retreat this year? And I already answered this online, but yes, I am going to the retreat this year. I went for the first time in 2021. I haven't missed one since. And I have met some fantastic people there. In fact, I think I ran into you last year there as well, Omar. I met Katie and Greg Barley of the Meeple Society, and I think anymore now, if I didn't go, I'd probably get in trouble. But I couldn't miss it. I can't miss an event like the retreat because that is where I get to play the most games, especially of the current year. I'm always getting to catch up on that year's big releases of games at that event, and so I feel like I can't miss an event like the Dice Tower retreat. So yes, I will be there. Looking forward to seeing you. Up next was Kay, who asked my top 3 themes, suggesting that space and sci-fi was probably my number 1, and also asked for my top 3 mechanisms. So let me go ahead and do this in reverse order. My number 3 favorite theme is probably going to be alcohol production / business management, because I certainly like the beer theme, and that's going to come up here again in a moment. But I really just like the idea of running any business. I like those games where, again, you're starting sort of small and you're building up. Where you've got to, maybe manage inventory, maybe manage production lines, expand the business across an area, the map, the globe, whatever it may be. And of course, sell that product for a profit. And so I'm even thinking of games like Smartphone. I think of Kanban by Vital Lacerda. Love that game about running a automotive business. So definitely business management. And, within that, certainly an alcohol production theme would be high in that list for me. Number 2 is Civ or city building game, which I'm also going to use to include some 4X or possibly 3X games, as I can do without the fighting stuff. And so I'm thinking about Suburbia, I'm thinking about Neom, thinking about Hellenic, A Story of Greece, which I have a sort of a sub-indent here, where anything with that Greek or Roman pantheon is something that I really enjoy. And it actually stems from an old video game that I used to play in college called Caesar 3, which was a city building game set in ancient Rome. And there was a lot more to do than just build the city. You had to establish trade routes. You had to, keep the emperor happy. There's a lot of other things going on. And so that just elevated that theme for me. And so again, games like Mosaic, Epics, which I've talked about here on the channel, those civ and city building games are of big interest to me. And then number one, of course, space and sci-fi. And originally I was going to say, just space. I don't even really care that much about sci-fi. But then I realized, no, that's actually not true. It is the other way around. I have those games. I'm thinking of Leaving Earth. I'm thinking about Leaving Earth, folks. I'm out of here. I'm thinking about the game Leaving Earth. It's been a long day. There's also I think it's a TMG game called Space Core 2300, something like that. I can't remember what it's called. I think I actually got rid of my copy because I didn't really like that game that much. But anyways, sorry. I like the modern space games. Leaving Earth is kind of set in that 1950s space race. But I do more enjoy the sci-fi elements. So talking about Star Trek many times. And I like the games with space travel, hyperspace, building spaceships, space stations, that kind of a thing. Anything that I can, again, incorporating some of my favorite mechanisms, as you asked, but into that sci-fi, like just doing it all in space. Business management in space would be a huge, interest or, interesting idea to me. And again, like a 4X or a civ building game in space, absolutely a game I would immediately seek out. So for mechanisms, for number 3, and I actually realized when I recorded this last time that I got a little bit of overlap here, but it's fine. Number 3 is tableau building for a mechanism. And these are games like Meadow. I'm trying to think of some other good tableau building. Hey, you know what? Like Honey Buzz that I've already mentioned. Games where you're kind of building up your own thing in front of you. And this is actually where that... what was that one Alexander Pfister game that I really liked? I'm blanking on the name of it. But where you're building out tiles like Carcassonne, but you're also trying to establish routes and build up your income and stuff like that. So those tableau building games I really like. I really like worker placement and action selection games. I like a worker placement game because it feels very structured. I'm going to go here and do that action. But I don't love them when you can get blocked out of spaces that you really need to get to. And so I do tend to gravitate just a little more towards the just straight up action selection game. On your turn, you can do any number of these 7 different things. And those are games that I feel like are probably a little harder to produce because you've got to make sure that someone can't just spam an action and win the game. You have to make sure that things are balanced, which is probably, I'm assuming, harder to do. But I also like, from the player's angle, to just, okay, I need to do this, and I'm going to just do it again and do it again. But geez, first I need to go here and get some more resources so I can do it again. And I love that sort of free will that we get as the player to do whatever you need to do, provided you can afford it, whatever else, within the confines of the game. But I like games that just let you do whatever you kind of need or want to do. My number 1 would be an engine or deck building game. And I've talked a ton about deck building games. I think everyone knows that that's high up on my list. But the engine building game is interesting because I tested this. I went to Wingspan on Board Game Geek, which everyone, I think, agrees it's an engine building game, right? You're adding these cards to these rows, and then when you get to trigger off that row, you trigger every card in that row, and so it becomes more and more powerful as you do it. But engine building doesn't exist on Board Game Geek. That is not a mechanism that is listed under Wingspan. It does say something about like rolling actions or progressive, something like that, but nothing about actually just engine building, which is kind of interesting because I think that's a very, very common term. And yes, maybe it can incorporate a couple of different styles. Maybe engine building can be done a couple of different ways, but I'm just surprised that that's not a actual mechanism on Board Game Geek. But it is my favorite mechanism, regardless of whatever it's called. I also did, for fun here, I did my least favorite mechanisms. I'll run through these quickly. I don't like area control or area majority games, especially ones that are randomly built on things like just drawing cards or rolling dice. One game that came to mind was Brew. I can't remember who this one is by. Has nothing to do with beer or tea or coffee or anything. I don't know why it's called Brew, except for that maybe you're brewing up trouble. I don't know. But it is a very weird, abstract area majority game with just a ton of randomness, a ton of take that. You just get to roll dice and, oh, hey, with this, I get to wipe you out of this area. And God, I hated that game. I don't like bartering, trading, negotiation games. I'm also going to lump bidding in here, although that's a fairly different mechanism. But because I play a lot of games two-player, I really just don't care for bartering and negotiation. But the other thing for me is that I get very stressed in negotiation, because to me it's almost like a mini game, right? I'm trying to beat you for this action, maybe to be first in turn order, or to try and get some component that I really need. And so even though we're playing this overall competition with each other, there's this added level of competition into it, and I think that just piques my anxiety a little more than I would like. So I tend to stay away from negotiation or trading games. And then lastly is push your luck. But also within that, just luck in general. I'm not a huge fan of chucking dice, especially when the dice alone get to dictate what you can do. I'm okay if there's some mitigation to those. One favorite game is Tidal Blades, Heroes of the Reef, the Reef, where you can roll poorly in these fights against these monsters, but then you can spend, I think they're the shell tokens, to change the results of those dice into something that you need. And so that makes it more, palatable for me. But when it comes to push your luck, games like Quacks, where, I don't know, I'm just going to pull this out. Oh, well, that sucked. Now I blew up and I get nothing. And I can't stand those, because especially though those games will have catch-up mechanisms in some cases, they still cannot catch up with just pure dumb bad luck. And I don't care for them. Anyways, those are my least favorite unasked for mechanisms. Thank you for the question, K. Simulation Chris asked, how many board game themed games do I have, and to provide a top 3. This was a bit tricky because I only have a handful of these games. There aren't that many to begin with. A lot of them are sheer crap. I've gotten rid of a handful for that same reason. So I'm going to run through this list, and this is very out of order. Even though I'm re-recording this, I didn't clean it up. So number 1 on this list is Beer Empire. This is from Board and Dice. This was a game I picked up secondhand many, many, many years ago. It's been out of print for a long time, which is fine because it's absolutely crap. I have an old review out here on the channel that you can certainly check out. It's old. Keep that in mind. But the idea with this was that you could make really, really good beer and get a couple points throughout the whole game, or you can make absolutely crap beer, saving your money. Instead of buying the good ingredients, you can save your money to influence the market to make people want your crappy beer and make a ton of money back. Which is exactly how the beer industry works when you look at players like Budweiser and Coors and those a lot of foreign-owned, actually, companies that are manipulating the beer market, trying to squash the craft beer market by making just complete swill and then convincing everybody that this is what you want by using patriotism in our military as advertising campaigns to try and sell you crap beer. Anyways, moving on. I've also got Brew Crafters on this list. I've mentioned this one a couple times already, even here in this episode. This was sort of a reskinning of Agricola, from what I understand, where you are building a brewery. You're running a business, and you can probably see where I'm going with this, so I'll come back to it. I also have this game. I actually pulled this off the shelf. This is called Brewmaster. It is from Cold Creek Publishing Company. I meant to look this up earlier, and I forgot, and now I think I will. The designers' names are buried so deep. In fact, maybe they're not even here. Maybe they are... Oh, here it is. Mike White and Chris White. On the last page of the rulebook, a good place to put your designers' names. And we have, while I'm here, here's some plastic poker chips. There's some dice. There's a couple of weird trophies that you can win. Here is a mess of cards. This box has not seen the light of day since 2016. This was the first game I ever logged on BGG, and I'm not going to go into this, I promise, but I kind of need to. This was originally a sort of reward that you could get by trading in a bunch of empty vials of yeast from the White Labs company. White Labs is a very, very reputable, fantastic company that produces beer yeast for both the home brewing and the commercial markets. They're a phenomenal company. They're based out of San Diego, California, where I was born, and they also have a location in North Carolina, I think. I've been there, and it was fantastic. And I've been to the one in San Diego. That was also fantastic. But anyways, you used to be able to trade in their empty vials when you've used them to get things like swag, merchandise, hats, shirts, extra yeast, posters, little things like that. And at one point, you could actually get this game. Now, by the time I remembered to trade in my vials, it was no longer available. So I bought this secondhand, and this is the worst game in this room. It is so bad. You're simply drawing from that huge deck of cards to try and make beers. It has an idea of like different styles and such, and you're trying to win competitions, but you're just drawing cards to try and make the beer. So you could go 3-4 turns, never get a yeast card, and you can't make anything. If I recall, there's no hand limit. There's not even anything in the book about what to do when the deck of cards runs out. Do you shuffle and redraw? Like, it doesn't tell you what to do. There's no exchange rate. There's no buying and selling, no trading, nothing that you can do to say, look, I really just need one more yeast. I've got 15 damn cards of hops. Can I sell something to get some yeast? Nope, not in the rules. Horrible game. I've got Homebrewers on the list. This is from the same designer who made Brew Crafters, which I'm just suddenly blanking on that name. Homebrewers is just not that good. I also have an old review of this out here on the channel. This was independent of the Dice Tower and that kind of stuff. He tried to get some neat ideas with the homebrewing hobby, but ultimately it was an engine building game where the ingredients that you put into the beer is actually what creates the engine, which was weird. But then also really about the time that you build up a beer to give you a lot of stuff. You know, you can brew that beer and it will give you more equipment. It'll give you some money. Not very much, because homebrewing is not a hobby where you make money. And it could give you points and other stuff. But once you max out that style on these different tracks, you then couldn't brew the beer anymore, which is certainly not realistic. But then that also means you can no longer use that sweet engine that you just built up for that style of beer. So I got rid of this one. It also used dice placement, you know, ran a rolling dice to then determine what you can do in your turn, and I just didn't care for it. That was Homebrewers. I have Microbrew on this list. This is a very small tin game. There's a review for this out here on the channel. These are old videos. I'm just warning you now, but they get the idea across. I was actually watching some of these actually after reading this question, Chris, so thank you for that. Microbrew is a pretty neat game. I'm actually thinking about taking it on our trip. I would love to rebuild this into a bigger box like this size. Just never got around to it, but it is a neat worker placement game with some pretty cunning strategy in what you can do with your recipes of beer, the beers that you have brewed that you have ready to go. Sometimes you're trying to get the right customer exactly what they want so they become a lifelong customer. Maybe other times you're just trying to make some quick money. Maybe even sometimes you're trying to poach that customer so that your opponent can't get them and stuff like that. It's a neat game. I don't know if you can still get this, but I've really enjoyed Microbrew. I've got Beer and Bread on here. The beer is a real minor aspect of that game. You're really not, I mean, you're making beer, but there's no concept of styles or customers or anything like that. It's basically, it's just you're making beer to have at the house back when water itself wasn't safe to drink. I've got Hallertau on this list. This is from Uwe Rosenberg, a fairly heavy, yet not overly complicated, stressful worker placement game where you're trying to manage a farm, trying to upgrade various aspects of your farmhouse to then be able to upgrade the farmhouse itself, all in the interest of getting points. It's a really good game, but again, the brewing is sort of a minor aspect of the game. There's no idea of styles. In fact, you're never actually brewing beer. You're growing grain and growing hops and using that to upgrade the brewery of your house, but that's it. You're never actually producing beer. I do still really like this game, and I really like the fact that it is set in Hallertau, Germany. Actually, it's Bavaria, Germany, where something like 80% of the world's hops are produced. And the last game I have on this list is Brewin' USA. This is from the same company that made Planet Unknown, Adam's Apple Games. Brewing USA was really bad. It used a lot of ideas, I think, from the Beer Empire game where you were trying to sort of establish a footing in various cities across the U.S., trying to build up market, if you will, in those cities. I really don't remember much about how this game played. The only thing I remember is that it had beer caps, actual beer caps. Now, they were arts and craft beer caps. You couldn't actually use them on a beer bottle because they didn't have the airtight seal on the inside. They were just for like making trinkets or whatever. They're also really bad on wooden tables. A metal cap, if you're moving this thing around a wooden table, you're going to scratch the shit out of your table. And once I realized that, doing a little bit of damage to, thankfully, a very cheap kitchen table that we had, I threw this game away. I didn't even bother trying to sell it. I just threw it away. Terrible game. I actually used some of the components in it as coasters on my other game table behind me, but that was Brewin' USA. Of that list, my number 3 is Hallertau. No, it's not a very strong beer-themed game, but it is a very good game in of itself. My number 2 is Microbrew. Again, if you can find it and you like a good puzzly 2-player game that can be expanded to 4 players if you get 2 copies, which I have and yet have never played it more than 2, I strongly recommend Microbrew, a very good game. And number 1 is Brewcrafters, hands down. It is a business management game where you're trying to build and upgrade a brewery, producing beer, selling it to get money and points, and just run the best business. Love Brewcrafters. Also, I think out of print, might be a little hard to find that one, but thank you for that question, Simulation Chris. Carl Tunist asked my opinion on Tiny Epic Games. Do I think it is a big game for a small price? Short answer, no. I think it's a decent games at a decent price, but in all honesty, I've really only played 2 of them. I've got Tiny Epic Galaxies and the Tiny Epic Dinosaurs I mentioned in the last episode. I also have Tiny Epic Kingdoms and Tiny Epic Tactics. Both of those are still in shrink. I've had them for a long time. I think I have another one too, but I don't know. Oh, Tiny Epic Quest. I have that one as well. And I think it is Tiny Epic Quest that has been often described as Zelda in a box. But I just haven't played them. And I don't really even have a good reason. Tiny Epic Galaxies was fine, but it used as its core mechanism a Yahtzee idea where you're rolling dice to try and see what actions you can take, and you can re-roll twice and maybe still not get what you really wanted. And I think that because of that, just sort of seeing it in my mind as a reskinned Yahtzee, and I realize that's really boiling it down, but to me I was like, hey look, I got into these hobby games to get away from those big box games like Yahtzee, Monopoly, Scrabble, whatever. And so when I felt like that's really all it was, I just kind of turned away from it. Tiny Epic Dinosaurs was okay, had some sort of wonky ideas in it. I did enjoy it, and I still keep telling myself I need to get to those other 3, but I have intentionally avoided some of the other games like Tiny Epic. Let me see, there's Tiny Epic Mechs. I love mechs. But just when I saw that it was just a straight up combat game, I stayed out of it. Tiny Epic Pirates used a rondel system that I didn't want to deal with. And there's been a couple others. I think Tiny Epic Crime kind of looks interesting, but I keep buying them, and again they sit. I don't play them, and so I've just stopped buying them. I think I would much rather a big tabletop experience that I can immerse myself into, that I can turn my head and see everything that's across the game. This idea of trying to shove it all into a small box and, therefore having very tiny, hard to reach, hard to grasp, whatever components just is not as interesting to me personally. That's just me though. I would not take my word as gospel on that in any way, shape, or form. The Meeple Society said, nope, no too much already. Really? Really? Is that how you want to be? Is that how you want to do this? When Santa shows up, I'm going to make sure you get yours. On that note, though, Greg Bowerly of the Meeple Society asked a somewhat rhetorical question about this very building catching on fire. What would I save? The recording equipment, the games, or the old cars stored underneath? I realize this is one of those, sort of supposed to be fun rhetorical questions. Questions like this really kind of freak me out. I know a couple people who have had their houses burned down, and so it's just not a comfortable subject to me, and my mind can't let me just answer it as the simple rhetorical question that it is. And I get it. I'm not flustered about it, but it's not really a realistic question, right? First of all, most of the recording equipment is from Amazon, pretty easy to replace. The games are way too big and heavy. I couldn't really save any of these. The cars, I would need a good hour or two to throw gas in them and charge the batteries and get the damn things to start. So it's all going up. It's all going up in flames, and I will just stand in the driveway stunned while I'm calling the insurance company. I get it. I think that if I maybe had the moment of mental clarity that I would not have, I might think to grab my number one game, which is out of print, hard to get. And I'm not going to tell you what it is because the top 100 is coming out. And I might think to grab the Leaving Earth box kind of up over my shoulder here, which, I had to have custom made. It was really expensive. But I think that I would just be in so much shock. And I'd be trying to get out in the driveway and stop it from spreading to save the main house, just all that kind of stuff. So I get it, but I think I'm just going to mostly abstain from this one. But thanks for the question. Tony Lawhorn, last one on the list, asked, what game got me into the hobby, and are there any Grail games I would love to acquire? So the sad answer to the first question is Ticket to Ride. And I don't mean that as it probably sounds. I think Ticket to Ride is a pretty decent game. I've gone through the sort of roller coaster to, holy crap, where does this come from? This game is awesome, to I'm way above this. Like, I'm too good for Ticket to Ride. That game is for children. To, okay, you know what? Actually, no, I take that back. It's a pretty decent game. It got me into this hobby, and it deserves its props. And that's kind of where I'm at now. What I mean by that is that I'd love to say that I had some really cool story about, meeting a designer or playing some really obscure game, and it really just, set things off for me. But the simple fact of the matter is we picked up Ticket to Ride at a Toys R Us a bunch of years ago. I even asked my wife, quite famously, are you sure you want to get this? You remember the Monopoly fight we had, right? But she persevered. We bought the game, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, the theme is whatever. But to me, it was that aspect of, I'm trying to do my thing, you're trying to do your thing. For the most part, we're not trying to hurt each other. Maybe blocking a little bit, we get into that now more days, no concept of it back then. But it was just that idea of, at the end of the game, we just see who did better. And I remember that I went and I Googled board games with victory points. And that was the beginning of the end, right? Before long, I was watching Shut Up and Sit Down. I bought a ton of their recommendations. I found the Dice Tower back when Tom was still standing in front of a wall of games with a clip-on battery-powered microphone. And I started watching that stuff. And over the years, I kind of thought, I could probably do this content creation stuff, right? I mean, it looks really cool. I'd love to talk about games. I'd love to get all this stuff. And here I am. And so that's how I got into the hobby. I don't really have any Grail games I would love to acquire. If I had to think of any, I would be listing games like Star Trek Fleet Captains. I'd be listing maybe, Eclipse or old versions of like Kanban. But I have them all. I have all that stuff. I think I've picked up most of the older games that I know that I really want. I did pick up one game just recently. It's not a Grail game, but it's a game I did not realize was out of print. I've talked about it here in the channel, and I'll be getting it here in the next week, so I'll talk about it when it shows up. I am looking forward to trying that one out. So what I'm going to do instead is mention a couple of older games that I really would love to try and play. And in this list, from 3 to 1 is Mechs vs. Minions. I just like this. I would just like to try this sort of MOBA style where you have sort of a main character and you're going through waves of enemies to try and take out a base at the end. I believe that's how that game plays. Just sounds kind of neat, and I wouldn't mind trying it. Number 2 is Glory to Rome. This is a very, very out of print, quite expensive game to acquire. And from what I understand, it's even a fairly lightweight game, and I've even seen some fairly negative reviews of it. I would just love to try it for its theme. Glory to Rome. And my number 1 is the original Civilization board game, the original sort of Sid Meier. And I did not realize this until I was working on the Voidfall review for the Dice Tower, that the Civilization games started off as board games and then went on to the video game platform. And I understand that the original Civilization is quite challenging. It's a very long game, and I'd love to try it out. I don't think it's worth having a copy of it, but I would love to play it. That was it. That was all the questions for the question of the week. Thank you, as always, for those questions. And I do actually have one more question for you. This is not the question of the week. I'll get to that in just a second. But I was holding off to do this AMA, right? I wanted to do it at 20. I was thinking about doing it at 25, but I was kind of anxious to have this conversation. I thought it'd be fun, and it has been fun. And I'm wondering, how often would you be comfortable with me doing like something like this? I feel like it's a little bit of a cop-out. Just asking you to ask me stuff. It's kind of a little maybe self-aggrandizing. I don't know. But I'm just kind of curious. I waited for 20 episodes. Would you rather I wait for 20 more, for 30 more, for maybe never doing it again? I'm curious what you would tolerate something like that to happen again. So here is the actual question of the week. I mentioned that I am traveling coming up here this week. I mentioned I'm going to be bringing some very small games to try and get played. How do you handle traveling with board games? Do you just not bother gaming, sort of accept that you're just not going to get to any gaming? Do you try to seek out maybe cafes to play at? Do you have some favorite games you like to travel with? Or like I said, do you kind of like, hey, now's a chance for me to try out some of those smaller games that I've just kind of neglected all along? I'm just kind of curious how you handle travel and gaming. Let me know, and we will chat about it next week. Word on the street is that I'm starting to run a little late if I still want dessert. So I'm going to try and wrap up this segment of recently played games fairly quickly. Daniel did join me here last week in the treehouse. This is actually the last time we're going to get to play for several weeks, as I'm out of town this week. He's using my cabin next week, and then I'll be down at Dice Tower East the week after that. So we got together, and I finally talked him into playing one of my absolute favorite games. This is the Age of Atlantis from Eldorado Games. I shouldn't say I talked him into it. We've talked about playing this and just never really quite had the opportunity. This is it's a lot of stuff in a box, all right? It is a worker placement game with something like 90 different spaces that you can go to. It's not a worker placement game to take actions. It's just pick a space, and you always have various actions available at that space, because it's just a map, right? So you can go and build various buildings. You can then research technologies of those buildings to increase things that you can do. You've got an asymmetrical building that each faction has available to them. You're eventually building these giant sort of mechanized myths. It's sort of a steampunk Age of Atlantis theme, which is kind of neat. And all this also exists as a tower defense game, in that you're trying to protect the city of Atlantis from invading armies, Greek and Roman, and I think Persian armies. And I just absolutely love this game. And we were about halfway through it when Daniel goes, Yep, I get it. I get why this is a Jeff game. Engine building, action selection, tech trees, the whole 9 yards. Really neat, large-sized miniatures that come pre-painted, by the way. A huge pewter statue of the Greek god of water. Yeah, that guy. Thank you. Anyways, love this game. I knew that I was going to win this one. We both went in knowing I was going to win this one. It is not a game that will usually fare well with on your first play, because there was so much going on. But he did very well. He hung in very tight with me with score, and I think we had a very good time. I think he enjoyed it. Even my worst games of this have been very good games. The Age of Atlantis from the now defunct Eldorado Games. If you want to know more about that, check out the Dice Tower Top 100 when that finally comes around. On Friday, I played Sovereign Fall of Wormwood with the designing team Damon Stay and Cassandra Chowdhury. I've already mentioned this game many times. I used this faction, the Neo-Genesis Church, which Damon has beaten me at before, and so I really wanted to give them a try, not realizing that he had actually changed some of the cards in the game since the last time I had played the game. But this was a live this was a live streamed event on Damon's YouTube channel, which is actually Damon Stay, S-T-E-A. That's his YouTube channel. They don't have a Fall of Wormwood YouTube channel, but I will try to remember to put a link to the video in the description of this video, because I won the game. I had a lot of fun, as I have always had a lot of fun playing Wormwood. Cassandra did a unique strategy where she tried to affect my actual church facility, which, of course, all your cards kind of come out semi-randomly, but I was able to get the church in play. The church lets you put one of your talent citizens on it, and you draw the top card of your deck. And if it's one of the echoes that scores in the game, you need 10 echoes to win. If it's an echo, you score it immediately. It doesn't have to get researched, and there's no way for it to get stolen. But if it's not, it gets scrapped. It's out of the game. So if it's a really core facility or an upgrade or a unit, it's gone, which is a bummer. She put an augment on my facility, which you can do in this game. And what it said is that whichever workers you're putting on that double their efforts. They basically generate twice their output. But at the next turn, when you would normally take them back, they die. The idea was that it was like a drug that you were giving your workers to make them work twice as hard, but then they literally work themselves to death. Weird dark theme, yeah, I get it. But it worked out really well, because then what it meant is, yeah, I had to lose the talent, but then I got to look at 2 cards and score any of them that were echoes. And so at the very end of the game, I was tied with Cassandra 9-9. I didn't have a way to get another echo out. I didn't have one being researched, and it was going to be very hard for me to steal any from either of them. And then I suddenly realized, a few seconds before she realized, that I could use her augment on my church to draw a ton of cards out of my deck, and all I needed was 1 to win the game. And she realized it. She lost her mind in the stream. It was so funny. And it was the first card. I drew the very first echo, and she was just like, damn it. And I mentioned it in that video, and I'll say it again now. It is why I've had so much fun with this game, because if you really just sit and you think and you look at what you have available to you, if you look at this engine that you have been building throughout the game, you will probably find a way to do what you need to do. And I love how brilliant this game is. Moving on, that night, my wife and I played Lands of the Mesozoic. I mentioned this last week. This is, I don't really know how to describe this, okay? You're putting these cards out. You've got to get land cards, herbivore dinosaurs, and eventually carnivore dinosaurs. You need the land cards to support the herbivores, and then you need the herbivores to support the carnivores. Makes perfect sense. And it does make perfect sense. And it's really interesting how they built this, because you're sort of tapping those cards to provide their resources to support the next chain of that ecosystem. But then if there's ever a kink, if you either have too many carnivores, then one of them will go extinct. Too many herbivores, the herbivores will go extinct, which could then cause a carnivore to go extinct. And if at any point you have too many herbivores, then you're consuming too much of your land. The land actually goes extinct, which can then again create a chain reaction, wiping out species of dinosaurs that you've built in your tableau. That's cool. What's maybe not cool is there's just a lot of stuff that it's mentioned in the rules. It's all there, but it's very easy to miss, and there's not enough iconography to back this stuff up on the board. So all cards that you play start off play exhausted, and I just missed it. In fact, I did see it, but I forgot it by the time I was teaching the game to my wife. And so we played all of our cards upright, ready to go, meaning that we did a lot more actions than we were supposed to do. There's also this special action that you can take once per round, which you play until everyone passes. That's a round. And it lets you either just, I think you have to spend 2 cards, and then you can draw 2 land cards, or 1 carnivore, or 1 herbivore, or you can extinct, clearing a card off of your board. And it kind of works like the game of Earth, in that cards that have gone extinct will still be there to score at the end. They're just no longer part of your ecosystem, so they don't work with your current engine, but you're still going to get any points from them, and any points that various goal cards that you have may require. But because that stuff wasn't really clearly mentioned in things like the player aids, things like these extinction cards that come out a couple times, twice actually, just twice throughout the game, it doesn't remind you how some of this stuff is supposed to work. And so we played this game completely wrong, and it was still very, very hard. I felt like we couldn't really get anything going. And even then, when you get things going, these extinction events happen that wipe out what you've built. And I get it. Like, again, it makes sense. But shit, has it ever become difficult to play? We were going to try it again last night to try and play it correctly. We went to a pub for a bourbon, beer, and barbecue event, and this guy needed a nap, so he didn't get back to this. I'm hoping we can get to it before we leave on our trip, because I would like to tell you a little bit more about Lands of Mesozoic when I play it the right way. I will try it out again, I really just hope that there is more to it than what I realized. Anyways, we also played Birds of a Feather over the weekend with my daughters. We did play this last night after Dad's power nap, like a 4-hour power nap. And I mentioned this one last week. I'm really enjoying this game. Very, very light game, very small footprint. We can easily play this at the pubs and such. You can probably play this on an airplane tray table. What I realized is that there's a little bit of a deck building element, not deck building, sorry, a trick taking game element to this. You're not actually taking tricks, and you're not trying to like trump anyone's cards or anything like that, but there is this element of you really need to wait for the right moment to play the right card. And so, for example, I only had one card of a certain environment, and you only get to see the cards of that environment when you play it. And so I had to wait until there were enough of these already out, and even hoping that someone else would go, hey, now's a good chance for me to score some of these cards, so I'm going to play a card of that same environment, and I played the same card of that environment, and suddenly I turned my one card into seeing like 4 or 5 different cards, which is exactly how you have to play this game. And I've really enjoyed it. I clobbered my girls at this one because I started to see that strategy of it. But I imagine that as they kind of catch up to me in that mindset, this game will get very tense, very, very tight in scores, and I think it will always be a pretty enjoyable game. I wish there were like some extra expansions you can get to check out birds in other countries. I don't know, like maybe Australia. But anyways, still a very good game, Birds of a Feather. And the last game that we played just today, here on Father's Day, my daughter really wanted to play Robot Quest Arena, which I kind of was joking, like, what do you want to do, beat up on your dad on Father's Day? Yes, she did. There was a bunch of that. But Daddy did win this one. In fact, I had some pretty good cards I managed to collect. Now, I did play one of them wrong. I had a grenade card that I used 3 times, and when I was going to use it for the 4th time, I finally decided to read the text at the bottom of the card, which says that basically after you play it, you scrap the card. It's supposed to come out of the game. So that did kind of lead me to a little bit of an unfair advantage. I did have a turn where I used the grenade to weaken them, took them both out, and still had a ton of damage cards left over. So I could have still gotten them even without the grenade, but I was kind of like, oops, I messed that one up. But great game. I'm really looking forward to the expansion to this coming out, and I think my daughter and I would have a lot of fun with the 2-player dual mode that's supposed to be added into that game. A lot of fun with this one, Robot Quest Arena. And that is the end of the Father's Day Weekly Ratchet. Again, for the second time, for the first time, the Weekly Ratchet. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the questions. I really just enjoy the interaction that I've got with you, the fantastic audience here at Tabletop Toolbox. Hopefully I'll have something to chat about here next week. Thank you so much. Again, let me know your travel game suggestions. If I get them in time, maybe I can even put some of them to use here this week. But anyways, I'll catch you next week, and I'll see you then.